The first thing the Veiled Dominion sent was an insult. I guess not a weapon. I think not a fleet. An insult, a single diplomatic transmission, 17 words translated into 43 languages simultaneously, so there could be no misunderstanding, no accident of meaning. We have reviewed your species. You don't qualify for negotiation. The second thing they sent was 43 warships. They expected silence, submission, maybe a distress signal from whatever small, soft creatures dared to call themselves a civilization. What they, in my opinion, got instead, why got a watch from the bridge of the ISV Remnant, standing 200,000 kilometers off the human fleet's port side as an official conclave observer, was the moment everything we thought we knew about warfare, about biology, about the cold mathematics of survival, got taken apart piece by piece. I should tell you, I'd agreed with the Veil. I'd read the same reports. I'd seen the human physiological assessments. No natural armor. No venom. Well, no redundant organs. Plus bones that shatter. A lifespan barely long enough to master one discipline. I mean, species that cried at music and got attached to inanimate objects, and I remember this detail from the file. It seemed relevant. Voluntarily ate things that caused them pain because they said it tasted good. I'd written, in my own assessment log, filed 6 weeks before the Veil arrived. Humanity presents no credible military threat. Recommend observer status only. Probability, I think, of survival against Veil engagement, for 0.2%. I want you to understand that I believe that number. I want, well, you to understand that I was there. And I want you to understand that what happened in the next 11 hours didn't just destroy a fleet. It destroyed every assumption I'd built my career on. Like, this is my account, logged in real time, mostly. Some of it I wrote after, when my hands had stopped shaking. I've been asked not to publish it. I'm publishing it anyway, and log entry, 0611 ship hours. ISV Remnant, observer deck, personal record only. The Veil dropped out of transit at 0600 exactly. I know the exact time because I was watching the transit signature on the sensor board when it happened, and because I have a habit, a bad one, my supervisor has mentioned it 14 times, of noting exact timestamps and everything. My meal logs have timestamps, which my sleep entries have timestamps. When my secondary filtration membrane itches, I note the time. 0600:03, 43 contacts. Clean formation. No wasted distance basically between ships, which told me something about their confidence. You only fly that tight when you're not worried about incoming fire. 0600:07. For what it's worth, the Veil transmission. I won't reproduce the full content. The 17 words are already everywhere. What the recordings don't capture is the tone of it, the frequency modulation the Veil used to signal social register. What a human linguist on board the Remnant later described to me as the voice you use to tell a child their drawing isn't very good, except you're talking to a species. That took me a moment to parse. I parsed it. I did not find it inaccurate. And 0600:31. The human fleet, 22 ships, roughly half the Veil's count, which was already being discussed in hushed tones on every open conclave channel as proof of the inevitable, went to full tactical posture. Running lights off. In my opinion, weapons powered. The, I guess, kind of response that, in the species I'd observed, typically means we know we're outmatched, but we're going to make this cost something. The Veil commanders, I learned later, found this moderately amusing. The human fleet commander was a woman named Okafor. I didn't know her name then. I knew her ship, the USSV Perseverance, a carrier-class vessel that my assessment hadn't, as outdated by roughly 2 technological generations. Big, slow to turn, heavy armor, which the Veil's penetrating rounds would handle without effort. Instead, all of this in my report. I'd given the Perseverance in particular a projected survival window of 11 minutes in a direct engagement. It lasted considerably longer than that. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That habit again. 0601:14, and the first thing that confused me was that the humans didn't fall back. I want to be precise about why this was confusing. Every tactical model every engagements database, every probabilistic framework, everything the Conclave's war colleges had built over 900 years of observing interstellar conflict, said that at this force differential, with this weapon disparity, The rational response was withdrawal. By time, force a diplomatic window. Even species that wanted to fight understood the math of retreat. Well, humans did not retreat. They advanced. Not a charge. Not that particular extinction behavior where a cornered species lunges because the panic response overwhelms the logic centers. This was measured, coordinated. The human fleet formed into a configuration I didn't immediately recognize, and I have observed 41 distinct naval doctrines across 38 species. I didn't recognize it because I'd never seen it before. The remnants pretty much tactical officer, a Peloran named Sev who had also filed an assessment, who had also given humans poor odds, who was currently standing very still at the sensor console, said quietly, "They're not grouping for a defensive stand." No, I agreed. They're grouping for a lane push. I had to look up what that meant. The term came from an old human competitive game, apparently, one of hundreds of games humans, invented for no survival reason, purely for the pleasure of competing against each other in controlled simulated conflict. A lane push. Concentrate force down a narrow axis, ignore flanks, penetrate deep, force the enemy to respond to you rather than the other way around. Against a superior force that outguns you on every metric. That's either very brave or very stupid, Sev said. I noted the time. 0601:44. The Veil's first salvo was, by any honest measure, overwhelming. 31 kind of ships fired in coordinated sequence at 0603. I watched it pretty much. On the board, energy signatures so dense the display software had to switch to reduced scale rendering just to show them all. The kind of barrage that, in my experience, ends engagements before they begin. The kind of thing that makes the casualty projections in the pre-battle reports feel, in retrospect, almost quaint. You project 11 minutes, and then 11 minutes turns out to have been generous. 12 of the human ships took direct hits. 4 of them kept moving. I'm going to stay on that for a moment because it still doesn't fully resolve in my mind. I have the scan data. I have the impact analysis Sev ran afterward twice because the first time she didn't believe the numbers. For ships took hits that, by mass, by penetration depth, by energy transfer, should have disabled them. Crew casualties were significant. Several sections were open to vacuum. Plus, one ship, the Indomitable Destroyer class, had lost its primary propulsion entirely and was running on what turned out to be a manually rerouted secondary system that wasn't technically designed to move a ship that size. They kept moving. Plus, not in a straight line. Not smoothly. The Indomitable was listing hard to port, and from the remnant's observation angle, it looked almost ungainly, wounded, like something that should have stopped and hadn't yet received the message. The other 3 damaged ships spread their formation wide. Not tactically optimal, not what any doctrine would suggest. What it did do was force the Veil to split targeting priorities. The undamaged ships closed the distance, and I have a note in the log here. I wrote it at 0603:58, and I remember writing it. Remember the particular quality of silence on the observation deck when I pulled out my notation pad instead of using the console, because I needed something physical to hold. The sort of note says, "Why aren't they stopping?" That's all. I don't know what I expected the note to do. Answer itself, maybe 0607:22, which I should note. Isn't eaten. I've been on the observation deck since 0430 anticipating the Veil's transit arrival, and I plan to eat after, which tells you something about my original expectations for how long this engagement would last. The human fleet commander, Okafor, though I still didn't know her name, did something at 0608 that I have been asked to describe in at least 3 separate official conclave debriefs, and that I still struggle to describe accurately. She split her fleet. 6 ships peeled off from a main advance at angles that served no obvious tactical purpose. They were the 6 smallest vessels, the ones with the least firepower. Not individually meaningless, but not the ships you'd choose for a decisive strike. The Veil's tactical systems registered them as a flanking attempt and allocated 3 ships each to intercept. The 6 small ships immediately changed course. Not toward the flanks. Not toward the Veil formation's weaknesses. They turned, and burned hard toward the sides of the combat space, toward what should have been empty vacuum, which is where you go when you're trying to escape, which is why the Veil allocated pursuit vectors. Then, the remaining human ships, 16, including for that were actively leaking atmosphere, did the thing I didn't have a framework for. They fired into the space the 6 ships had been. Not where they were. Not where the Veil was. The space in between, the projected transit corridor between the two forces, the stretch of vacuum that in 4 seconds would be occupied by. The Veil's second salvo already fired, already in transit. The Veil fired their second salvo at 0607:58. The human countersalvo hit it in the corridor at 0608:03. I've been asked whether the human commanders could have known the Veil would fire when they did. Whether they had intelligence about Veil recharge cycles, weapons timing, tactical doctrines. I'll say this. The Veil recharge cycle is a conclave-protected intelligence datum that wasn't shared with humanity. The Veil tactical doctrine is not public knowledge. The timing window was 4 seconds. 4 seconds, Sev said very quietly at 0608:06. They calculated that. I was writing a timestamp. 0612:17. Still haven't eaten. Not hungry anymore. The part that changed the shape of everything. The part one keep coming back to, the part that made me eventually write this account against explicit advisory, didn't happen during the main engagement. It happened during the gap. After the interdiction shot disrupted the Veil's second salvo, there were approximately 90 seconds in which neither fleet fired. For what it's worth, Veil because their systems needed to resequence after the unexpected counter-detonation cascade. The humans because I didn't know why at the time. I know now. They were talking. Not to each other. The communication signature was outbound, directed at the Veil flagship. The Veil did not respond. Their commander later described it. In the post-engagement report I was given access to by a source who asked not to be named as an irritant. The humans kept transmitting. The content of those transmissions was eventually declassified. I've read them. I've read them several times. They're not what you'd expect. Not threats, not demands, not the psychological warfare broadcast that several species use to degrade enemy morale. Okafor's transmissions were an offer. Specific, detailed, non-humiliating, a withdrawal framework that let the Veil disengage with their formation intact, and their casualties below the threshold that typically triggers political consequences back in Veil space. She was in the middle of an active engagement in a damaged fleet against a force she had every reason to expect would destroy her, trying to give them a way out. The Veil's commander responded at 0610:03 with the Veil equivalent of a dismissal noise. I know the translation. It's closer to don't. Okafor acknowledged the transmission. The communication, record shows a 3-second gap after the acknowledgement, which in human communication apparently corresponds to the time it takes to exhale. At 0610:07, the human fleet returned to full offensive posture. For what it's worth, I noted the time. I think I noted it twice. The second sort of notation was an error. I was pressing too hard on the stylus. 0618:44. The honestly, second phase of the engagement lasted 9 minutes and 22 seconds. I TBH won't walk through it in full detail here. There are other accounts, official ones, with proper tactical analysis, force vectors, and all the numbers laid out in formats the Conclave Strategy Academies have been arguing over for the last several months. What I'll say is this. The Veil had a significant force advantage at the beginning of those 9 minutes, and they did not have it at the end. Not because the humans were more powerful. Not because the, technology gap closed, or because some extraordinary weapon was deployed, or because some dramatic singular moment turned the tide. It was none of those things, which it was that the humans had apparently been planning, specifically, individually, personally planning for a situation that was beyond recovery, and they'd each made decisions about what to do in that situation, and those decisions were different from each other in ways that somehow, inexplicably added up. 3 different commanders made 3 different calls in 3 different moments that should not have interlocked the way they did, except that they'd apparently discussed it. Not in their tactical briefings. In what turned out to be a 4-hour conversation the night before the Veil arrived, in the Perseverance's common room, over a communal meal. The tactical AI aboard the Remnant ran a probability analysis afterward. The specific sequence, I think, of human decisions, given normal variance in command behavior under fire, should have occurred in roughly one engagement out of every 1,400. They'd eaten together the night before and apparently talked about exactly this scenario. I have one more note from 0619:22, written while the last 3 Veil ships were executing emergency withdrawal. I don't know why I wrote it. It kind of doesn't fit anywhere in the official account. It just says, they try to warn them, at 0608, which nobody listened. Log entry, 0800 ship hours, next cycle. ISV Remnant, berth alongside USSV Perseverance for damage. Assessment exchange. I think, personal record. Sensitive. I think, to be honest about something. I requested the observer transfer. Conclave protocol after an engagement like this is for observer vessels to file initial reports, hold position, and await coordination orders from Conclave Command. There's a process. It involves a lot of secure channels and bureaucratic staging and filling out fields in a report template that was clearly designed by someone who has never observed an engagement and thought the main thing observers would need to convey was what type of ordnance was used. I filed the initial report. I held position for what it's worth for 2.5 hours, and then I sent a request to transfer temporarily aboard the Perseverance for what I called close observation of human crew behavior in immediate post-engagement environment. My supervisor denied it. I submitted it again. She, I think, denied it again with a note that said, and I'm quoting directly Savarek, this is not what observers do. I sent it a third time and did not include a justification, which apparently broke something in the approval software because it went through. That's my confession. I exploited a bureaucratic anomaly to get aboard a human warship 9 hours after watching that warship do something I couldn't explain because I needed to see what they were like afterward. I keep notes. I note times, and I needed to know. The Perseverance, wasn't what I expected. I don't know actually exactly what I expected. Something reverent, maybe, and a species that had just defeated a significantly superior force, that had done it through a combination of calculation and coordination and something I was still struggling to name. I would have expected a particular atmosphere. Something measured and grave, the weight of what had occurred sitting over the ship like a pressure system. What I got instead was noise. The docking bay was already occupied when my shuttle arrived. 3 deck crews working simultaneously on hull breach patches, a portable fabrication unit running at full cycle, sparks periodically landing on the bay floor with nobody apparently worried about where they went. One of the deck crew called something to another in a language I didn't have, not standard, something else, something older, and the other one laughed. Not a polite laugh, plus a real one. My liaison met me at the bay entrance. I'd been told her name was Lieutenant Ferreira and that she had been assigned to make easier conclave observer access, and that she had some combat medical training. What the brief did not tell me was that she had her left arm in a fabricated brace from the elbow down, or that she had 3 separate sealed wound patches on her neck and jaw that still showed the faint outline of the injuries beneath, or that she appeared to be in a mood that I, even with my limited experience reading human faces, could only describe as inconvenienced. "Observer Savarek," she said. "Welcome. We're a little busy." "I can see that," I said. "I won't. You want to see the commander." It wasn't a question. "I want to observe general crew behavior in the—" "You want to see the commander," she said again, not unkindly, and turned and walked. I followed. The Perseverance's corridors weren't optimized for my species' proportions. I'm not a tall individual by conclave standards. Sev finds this personally offensive, which I've never entirely understood, but the ceiling clearances on this ship were still roughly 20%. Lower than I guess, have preferred, and the lighting leaned toward a warm yellow spectrum that I associated on my home world with the ambient quality of late afternoon when nothing important was happening. It made everything feel slightly domestic. Not well in a bad way, just in a pretty much way isn't expected from a warship. The crew we passed in the corridors weren't standing at attention or moving at a particular pace that signaled anything. Some of them glanced at me with expressions I couldn't fully read. One of them nodded, which Ferreira had warned me was a human greeting gesture, and I nodded back, which produced a very small smile, which was apparently acceptable. There was sound, to be fair, everywhere on this ship. That was the thing that took getting used to. On the Remnant, we run at 40 decibel ambient max because the Conclave safety standards were written largely with species that have more sensitive acoustic processing than mine. The Perseverance hummed and clanged, and from one corridor junction we passed, emitted music, an actual recurring acoustic arrangement, apparently being played by one of the crew on a physical instrument during what I assumed was a scheduled rest period. I noted 0814:07. Music in the junction corridor. I don't know why I noted it. It didn't seem relevant to anything. I noted it anyway, which Okafor was in the tactical center rather than the command bridge. I don't know what I'd built up in my head over the past 9 hours. Something commensurate with what I'd watch her do, probably. Some physical presence that matched the weight of the decisions I'd seen logged in the engagement record. I'd reviewed the command communications 17 times during the night cycle, which is maybe more than was strictly necessary, and each time I came back to the moment at 0610:07. The exhale, the 3-second gap, the return to offensive posture. I tried to imagine the person making that choice, and the choice kept being too large to fit into the shape of a person. She was sitting on the edge of a console, which didn't look comfortable, eating from a container that smelled aggressively of something I didn't have a category for. Medium height. Compact. The kind of build that my homeworld's kinetic taxonomy would classify as endurance-oriented. Not mass, just proportion, the suggestion of a body that had been under load for a long time and had simply adapted to it. The gray at her temple was more pronounced on the left side than the right, which is a bilateral asymmetry I'd never noticed on a human before. I noted it. Actually, 0816:33. Plus, she looked up from the container when Ferreira brought me in, and her expression did approximately nothing. "Observer," she said. "Commander Okafor." I used the formal conclave address for a combatant of her confirmed rank, which apparently surprised her, a small shift in the muscles around her eyes. "Thank you for allowing the transfer. Ferreira thought you'd be useful," she said. I turned to Ferreira. Ferreira appeared to find the corridor ceiling very interesting. "In what capacity?" I guess I asked. "You watched the whole thing, right?" "From outside." "From the Remnant." "Yes." She put down the container. "Then you saw something I didn't." "I was inside it." She tapped the side of her head, a human gesture I'd categorized from previous diplomatic observation notes as indicating the particular limitation of perspective when too close to an event. "I want to know what it looked like from out there." That wasn't what I'd expected her to ask me. I'd prepared several careful observer neutrality statements. I had a framework for deflecting requests that might compromise conclave impartiality. I said, "It looked like something I don't have a word for." She considered that. Then, "Yeah, that's usually how it goes." She picked up the container again and ate a piece of whatever was in it. I registered belatedly that the smell was coming from something being applied to the food, a powder of some kind, bright orange-red, that I'd seen in the human dietary files, and that had been flagged in our environmental tolerance briefings as a compound that had direct neurological impact on approximately half of all known organic species. She was eating it recreationally. She noticed me noticing. "Want some?" she asked. "My species doesn't process capsaicin," I said, and then immediately wondered why I knew the word for it in standard. "Fair." She ate another piece, and "What didn't you have a word for?" I thought about that for a long moment. The tactical center was quiet by the standards of the rest of the ship. 2 crew members were running analysis at adjacent consoles, and one of them had a coffee container that had been refilled so many times the outside of the cup had developed a faint ring stain that Ferreira told me later was called a coffee halo, and was considered on some ships a mark of a particularly long watch. I noted sort of this, which 0818:21. Irrelevant. "The transmission," I said finally, at 0608. Okafor's expression shifted. Not much, which something at the corners of her eyes that I couldn't fully read. "You were offering them a way out," I said. in the middle of an active engagement, while your ships were damaged, while the outcome was uncertain. The outcome was going to be bad for them, she said. Whether I mean or not, we knew it yet. You knew. I thought there was a good chance. A pause. There's always, in my opinion, a chance you're wrong. But you offered the withdrawal framework anyway. Yeah. Why? She looked at me like the question was very simple or very complicated, and she hadn't yet decided which one to explain. Because if they'd taken it, she said, nobody else would have had to die. I want to note that this is the point in my account where the conclave debriefs start asking more questions. Most of, in my opinion, the questions are tactical. They want to know about the counter-salvo timing, the lane configuration, the decision architecture that produced the specific sequence of command calls that the probability analysis flagged as statistically implausible. Those are reasonable questions, which I answer them as best I can. The question nobody has asked me yet, or has asked and then moved past when I try to answer it, is the one I keep getting stuck on. Why does, for what it's worth, it matter that she tried to stop it first? I've been pretty much working on an answer to that question for several months now. I keep running up against the same problem. In every tactical doctrine I know, in every strategic framework the conclave uses, in every engagement model I was trained on, the cessation offer is a negotiating tactic. It's something you do to create hesitation, to buy time, to generate a psychological advantage. The content of, in my opinion, the offer isn't the point. The effect, pretty much, on the adversary is the point. What Okafor's transmissions contained was a genuinely workable exit. Specific, equitable, non-punitive, and the framework would have held up legally. I had a conclave treaty specialist review it. She told me, and I wrote this down, and her name and timestamp are in the supporting files. This would have been a good deal for the Veil. They rejected it because they didn't believe humans could execute what they were threatening to execute. They didn't believe it because everything they knew about humans said it wasn't possible. I believed the same thing 4 hours earlier. There's a part of this I haven't told the conclave debriefers yet. I'm not sure if I'm going to, which I was on the Perseverance for 11 hours total. I observed crew behavior in the recovery period, the damage assessments, the medical triages, the maintenance cycles. I noted everything. Timestamps are very precise. Plus, I filled 23 pages. At hour 9, Ferreira took me to what she called the memorial board, a physical surface near the ship's central junction, covered in photographs. Not digital, printed physical photographs, which is a materially inefficient method of preserving visual records, and which, when I pointed this out, produced from Ferreira a very patient look that suggested this wasn't the first time someone had made this observation. The photographs were, in my opinion, of the crew members who hadn't survived the engagement. 14 of them, which each photograph had something handwritten beneath it. Not rank, not service number, not the standard casualty log entries. Names, yes, but kind of also small things. Plus, one said terrible card player. One said would have hated this. And one, a photograph of a young crew member who looked startlingly young even by human standards, just said he brought his own hot sauce. Ferreira stood beside me while I read them. She didn't say anything. I noted the time, 0944:17. Then, I noted something that I've never noted in a log before in 14 years of observer work, in 41 documented conflicts across 38 species. I noted, I don't have a word for what I'm looking at, which was the same thing I'd told Okafor in the tactical center. And I guess she'd said, yeah, that's usually how it goes. I've been trying to figure out if she meant the war part or the board part or all of it. I've been trying to figure out why a species that tried, genuinely tried, to stop the fight before it started was the same species that walked through 9 minutes of hell to finish it. I've been trying to figure out why those two things feel from the outside like they should be contradictory and why they clearly aren't. My supervisor sent me a message this morning asking for the final observer report. I filed preliminary sections. The tactical analysis is complete. The force assessment, the engagement chronology, the weapons documentation, all done. I'm still working on the final section. The category I've been assigned to fill out is labeled, in the conclave template, cultural and behavioral observations. I've rewritten it 11 times. Current draft is 2 sentences. Plus, I think the humans tried to stop it. When it couldn't, I guess, be stopped, they made sure it ended. My supervisor will probably ask me to expand it. I'm not sure I have anything to add.